So, hey folks, I'm Brenton. Let me put this link and leave it up here for a little bit, just in case you want to grab a copy of these slides. We've got kind of a small screen to work with, so I'm not sure how legible everything that's there will be. But I'll kind of point and talk through what's what, so give you a chance to go through and get a copy of that link. Who am I? I've been doing this forever. My first hack was actually punch cards. I figured it was in high school. I figured out that if I punched the card just the right way, I could crash the IBM system we were using in class, and that would free up 20 minutes. I could go down to the automotive shop and work on my Mustang. So I've been working at this for many, many years. Oh, if you can do consulting work for the FBI, get it in your contract that they got to bring you to the basement of the Hoover building and let you shoot any gun you want. My two favorites was Al Capone's Tommy gun, and they had a cane that shoots a 22 caliber bullet if you hit the cane on the ground the right way. That was fun. So yeah, I've been at this for a while. Here's that link. I already showed you that. And I want to talk a little bit about the anatomy of the attack. How do we catch things? Because we know, we need some endpoint stuff, we need some firewall stuff, but those still keep failing. And one of the challenges we kind of run into is it kind of seems like once the attacker gets in, we have a heck of a time trying to get them back out again. So when you look at what's the anatomy of an attack, I know Mike breaks this up into a lot of different categories, but you can really break it down into about 4 different phases. There's the initial compromise. So they find vulnerability in the software. These days, the biggest one is phishing, right? Somebody gets an email, they click something they shouldn't have. That's what's going to give them their initial access point on the network. Pivot and escalate is, okay, now that they're in with regular user permissions on one system, they're going to want to escalate that access. So that may be admin on the system itself. That may be, I'm going to go after other systems on the wire right now I have access to, and maybe try out buffer overflow against something and get a high level of access to that. Establish persistence. In other words, hey, if you reboot your machine, I'm still here. You're not getting rid of me that easily. And then finally, C2 and exfiltration. And for whatever reason, we tend to kind of ignore that. And when you look at, write-ups done by like Ambient and FireEye and different malware strains that are out there, they'll show you the code, they'll talk about what it does on the system, and if you're lucky, they'll tell you what port this is using and not tell you a whole much more. We ignore the heck out of that. Bad thing, we ignore the heck out of that. Good thing, because we ignore the heck out of that, the bad guys do too. And this tends to be one of the easiest ways to actually figure out if your systems have gone whack or not. So how does all this stuff work? Well, there's a couple of different ways that an attacker is going to take control of this internal system. They all function sort of the same way with some slight variations. So in this case here, this is the most basic. Attacker gets malware on the system. They can't talk to it directly because there's a firewall in the way. So what they use is a proxy. We call it a command and control server or a C2 server, but effectively it's just acting as a proxy. It's acting as a middle system. So this compromised system will just call out to that box on a regular basis and say, hi, I'm here, I'm compromised. Do you have anything for me to do? And most of the time it's probably told, nope, nothing in your work queue, go back to sleep. And then it'll wait some period of time and say, hi, I'm back, I'm still compromised. You got anything for me to do? No, okay, I'll go back to sleep. And it just does that over and over again. When the attacker wants to do something, like let's say they want to run the task list command, they'll connect up to this proxy, connect up to the C2 server, and just say, hey, the next time this thing checks in, tell it to run the task list command. So now when this thing calls and says, do you have anything for me to do? Yes, run the task list command. So now the task list command gets executed, and the output from that command gets exfiltrated out as part of that same C2 session. So in a nutshell, that's how most command and control works. Now there's a lot of variations off of this. In the last example I gave, the attacker is the one that's kind of that's maintaining that C2 server, but they don't have to do it this way. You can use different social media like Gmail. This was, what did they use? GCAP. So you may remember a number of years back, the Russians took out the Ukrainian power grid, and the way they did that was they got someone to click a link they shouldn't have, It was a spreadsheet. They went to open the spreadsheet and it said, oh, you're running an old version of Microsoft Excel. You need to enable macros to convert this document. Well, come on. How many of us really know if we're running an old version of Excel these days? Because it keeps getting released all the time. So some click something they shouldn't have. That set up a malware client that just connected to a Gmail account. And the way this was set up was the attacker would simply email that account. And in the body of the message, task list. Oh, okay, now the next time this checks in, it knows it needs to go and run the task list command. Once it runs that command, now it just emails out to the attacker at a different address. Here was the output from that command. So social media can also be used as a command and control channel. This is fairly new over the last couple of years, and I thought this was really creative. So one of the challenges with that first model I showed you is you've got a system off of the side that they're talking to, and you may look at that and think, well, I'll see that system talking to someone that's never talked to before on a regular basis. That might give me a clue of what's going on. And the attackers figured out, oh, hey, yeah, that's what you might trigger into. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take our command and control server and we're going to put it behind the legitimate content delivery network. I've seen it behind Amazon's, I've seen it behind Akamai's. So now, when this thing's calling out to see if there's anything that's work queue, it's talking to multiple different IP addresses, not just one anymore. So that signal of constantly calling out is getting split up over multiple IPs. Further, not only is it this malicious traffic going to these systems, it's illegit traffic too. I mentioned Akamai, biggest content delivery network in the world. Everybody uses it, including Microsoft. So the system, when it goes, or any system that goes to check to see, hey, are there any new patches? It's hitting the same CDN network. So I've got legitimate traffic mixed in. I've got my signal over multiple IPs. How do I track this? Well, what you need to do is before we can look at the IP address, who's talking to this IP. So we can take, for each of my internal systems, what IPs are they persistently talking to out on the internet. For this, I got to look at what's the fully qualified domain name they're talking to. So I can look at the host parameter if it's HTTP, I can look at the SNI parameter if it's HTTPS, and oh, by the way, yeah, they're trying to get rid of exposing the SNI with the latest version of HTTPS. Please don't do that because you lose all this vulnerabilities, all this visibility. There's a lot of stuff that we're being told is for privacy reasons that are just going to absolutely blind us if we do it. DNS over TLS is another great example of that. But yeah, multiple signal over multiple IPs, this is another possibility, and I've seen this one a lot too. So all of the models I gave you so far, you would see this system that's compromised talking to somebody. So one of the common techniques I see a lot of incident teams do is if we suspect this system's been compromised, let's just look at all the traffic it's sending out to the internet, right? Here's a way to manage this without this system sending any additional traffic directly to the internet anymore. What we do, so we're up here with bad guy with little red horns. We go out and we register a domain. So for the sake of argument, let's say we register evil.com. Well, when you register a domain, you get to identify your authoritative name servers, right? We identify our C2 servers as our authoritative name servers. So now anybody trying to do a lookup within our domain is going to end up going to our C2 servers. Now, I get this user to click something they shouldn't have, get some malware on the box. I want to create my command and control channel. So what this system does is it just simply sends a record query, or it could be an MX or name server. I've seen text record queries, DKIM, so don't get caught up in the record. But what it does is it sends a query to that domain. Well, that goes to the local resolver. Resolver looks at the top level name servers to figure out this system is authoritative for that domain. It now sends that query out to that domain. So now the answer that comes back is going to be, whether there was anything that system needs to do or not, like run the task list command. Nothing new is leaving this box directly, but there are additional DNS queries going out to the DNS server, wherever our DNS server happens to be. So here at the perimeter, what are we going to see? We're going to see a DNS server making DNS queries. Well, it does that all day, right? This is actually a pretty neat trick. And I've got some decodes of this coming up in a little bit. This is probably one of the more popular ones I've been seeing lately. Are we getting so? This is how the attackers are setting up the command and control channels. Are we getting any better at this? My personal opinion is no. There are some reports, like the Mandiant report, that says, yeah, we're getting better. It used to take us 3 to 6 months to figure out once we got compromised, right? Think about like our security tools. Some of them are protection based. This is what keeps the bad people out. So our firewalls, our EDR, all that, two-factor, let's play cyber bingo. All of our cyber bingo hits, that's all going to be our protection. Then we have, this is what we do when we figure out that they got in. We go into incident response mode. We pull in legal. We pull in, PR. Maybe we cash in our cyber insurance. We have things we do once we know they're in. The problem is that we're in the middle. How do we figure out when our protections have failed and we need to go in incident response mode? How good are we at that today? And like I said, historically, it's been 3 to 6 months on average. And oh, by the way, over 50% of the time, you're not the one that figured out that your environment is compromised. It's going to be some outside third party. Give you a good example. You may remember Sunburst from a couple of years ago. So Sunburst was when Solar Winds, it was a supply chain attack. So the Russians broke into Solar Winds, modified their code. They put their malware in with the Solar Winds code. Solar Winds digitally signed it. So when your EDR software looked at it to say, is this safe or not? Well, it was signed by Solar Winds, so it must be okay. Well, except it had malware in it now. So now it starts calling out. Most environments didn't catch that until FireEye told them it was something to worry about 6 months after it started hitting. So there's a great example of 3 to 6 months, and it's an outside third party letting you know you have a problem. And that's our average. Now, some of these, like the Mandiant report, is saying, oh no, we're getting better. That dwell time's down to 30 days. Okay, here's my problem with their report. They're working in ransomware, and they're identifying a ransomware trigger as a positive detect. In other words, when the ransomware goes off and says, we've encrypted your drive, send money to this Bitcoin wallet if you want your data back, they're looking at that and saying, positive detect, we caught it. So, yep, we saw it said ransomware on the screen, we caught that. Oh, come on, no. So to give you an analogy of that, that's like you come home one night and all your electronics have been stolen, right? And at 7 a.m. in the morning, someone knocks on your front door and says, hi, I'm the one who stole all your electronics. Are you going to go on social media and say, wow, the cops in Fort Myers are really awesome at figuring out B&Es. I got broken into, it was resolved, we knew who did it in less than 12 hours. You going to do that? No. Why? Because the cops had nothing to do with it. I look at this the same way. What is really telling me is even the studies that say, yes, we're getting better at this, when you look at how many man hours did it take to recover, how much money was involved in the recovery, how much reputation loss was involved with this whole thing, those numbers haven't changed. So I would expect if we're catching things in 30 days instead of 6 months, it would be cheaper, it would be faster to recover. All those things would improve. Even the report saying we're getting better, saying no improvement. That to me says, yeah, no, we're not really getting any better at this yet. But I have to say, oh, I could go on for an hour on this. Um, so, full disclosure, I was doing centralized logging and then checking those things with signatures. I've been doing that since the early 90s. I'm not sure if that or firewalls was actually the first real cyber blue team tool I worked with. It was one or the other. But I've done this for years. I wrote Stanza's original material on doing log analysis. Um, I've been at this for a while. You can read the bullets for yourself. I don't have to read them out. But one of the things that was kind of an epiphany for me was this thing working. And if you think about it, all of our security frameworks require this, right? If you want to be PCI, you need a SIM. You want to be ISO 27001, you need a SIM. If you want to be SOC 2 compliant, you need, you guessed it, a SIM. Everybody's requiring this, and we're still not getting better at catching the bad guys. So how good of a job is this really doing for us? Maybe not so much. So should we keep doing the same thing that's not working over and over again, hoping for a different outlay? No, there's a description for that. It's not a positive one. Now, you'll hear a lot of folks say, oh, yeah, AI is going to fix cybersecurity, right? If you download the slides, I just recommend clicking through on each of these links and being scared. Here's so first of all, yeah, AI is vaporware. This is rebranding. What do I mean by that? I mean that, so like we had firewalls, and then we had deep packet inspection firewalls, and then we had next gen firewalls. And when you look at the technology and what they were doing under the hood, it was absolutely no different than stateful inspection. So these are terms coming out of a marketing team trying to figure out how to resell products that the sales have slowed down. They're trying to figure out a way to re-energize sales. That's where these terms come from. AI is the same thing. It's still machine learning. There's no real actual intelligence here. So can this be helpful? Yes, it can. But one of the challenges we face today, and I don't really see anybody addressing this, is our QA process has to change. And what I mean by that is imagine I've got a network-based intrusion prevention system, and I'm writing a signature to try and catch some sort of attack. I can take some of my data and I can run it through that, and I can take a look at how does it do? What's my false positive rate? It's pretty easy to go through and test. One of the challenges you run into with machine learning is that we set these up as these self-adapting. It'll go through and it will figure out how it wants to reweight everything. I can give you the right example of that. So I wanted us to do some playing around with AI to see how good will this be at catching command and control channels. And I went through, ran some test data through it, and all of a sudden it's doing really well. Well, one of the challenges we have today with AI, because everybody's in a rush to get it out of the market, nobody's really giving us the ability to do config QA, is there's no way to really test this code unless you're the one who wrote it. So your AI is a black box. So you need to look at what you put in, see what comes out, and guess what's actually happening in the middle. So what I ended up with was this AI system was getting better at detecting these command and control channels. So I said, great, let me do some A/B testing to figure out why. The software had figured out that I was using DigitalOcean as my testing environment for my command and control servers. So anything that was going to an autonomous system number associated with DigitalOcean, it was saying, well, that must be malware. So it was flagging it just because of that. No, stop, don't do that anymore. Okay, kill that, now let's try it again. Well, the second time, it picked up on the words DigitalOcean that's associated with each of the autonomous system names, and was cluing in on that. No, don't do that, stop. Try it again. The third time, it was picking up on the IP address space that was based on that. Notice what's happening. It's looking like it's working, but now kind of playing whack-a-mole to try and actually get it tuned correctly. I think we can figure this out, but I also think we have to recognize we need to figure it out, and I don't see any vendors really doing that yet. So what should threat hunting look like? You know, in other words, we said we've got those two sets of tools, right? Keep the bad guys out. This is what we do when we know the bad guys are in. How do we close that gap between them? This is where threat hunting comes in. One of the cool things about threat hunting is this is brand new tech. This is, if you get involved with this, you're on the bleeding edge. You know, unlike pen testing, where it's been there, done that for over 20 years now, folks are still trying to kind of vet this out. So the process I have listed here is based on my experience. You may get something different from other folks. You know, like some folks like to recommend, oh, come up with a hypothesis of how folks might have gotten broken in, and then go hunt that. No, don't do that. Why? Because what you understand is limited and the attackers might have come up with something you didn't, you'll never find it. So there's a number of reasons why I came up with this process here. Step one, check for connection persistency. In other words, we said that WAC system, one of those methods we covered, it's going to use that to reach out and try and talk to the internet. So let's look for systems that are in constant communication with hosts out on the internet. Those become interesting, those become worth going in and paying attention to. When you find that, is there a business need for that connection? In other words, it's my Linux box, Ubuntu, every 20 minutes it's going out and talking to a server with an NTP.org. Well, it's just the system keeping the system time, right? There's a business need for that. Our business need is that our system times need to stay accurate. So that's okay. Or my Windows system is going to windowsupdate.com. Oh, okay, that system's just checking for patches. That's okay. So anytime we find persistency, we should be able to identify a business need. It's going to Guangzhou, China. Okay? I actually ran into this with a client. They rolled out some software, took a look at their network, said, hey, can you take a look at this? And they had about a half a dozen systems that were connecting to an IP address that was in Guangzhou, China. So my conversation with them went along the lines of, do you have a field office in Guangzhou, China? No. Do you have a business partner in Guangzhou, China? No. Do you have a vendor in Guangzhou, China? No. Okay. Yeah, you need to dig into this thing. And if for that particular customer, what it turned out to be was their facilities team bought 6 IP-based cameras off of Amazon, and the vendor pre-compromised them, which I thought was great because the vendor didn't even charge them extra money for compromising those cameras. And what the cameras were doing, taking in pictures of the inside of the manufacturing facility, and you guessed it, sending it off to Guangzhou, China. So again, no business need association. Yeah, that makes it something worth digging a little bit deeper. So if you find persistency, you can't identify a business need, now let's go in and take a look at the protocol. Because what I found is that most C2 channels don't look perfectly normal. There's always something a little bit funky about it. And a lot of times during a protocol analysis, you'll figure that out. After that, do an investigation on the internal system. One of the things I like to do is leverage Microsoft Sysmon utility to record ID3s. ID3s are applications talking on the network. So they may be servicing inbound connections, they may be creating outbound connections, but either way, it's on the network. And just log that, that's it. Don't worry about permissions or user changes or any of that other crap that fills up your drive and makes it slow to search the database and, ties up your network and the whole bit. ID3s is the way to go. Because if I get this far and I still can't figure out if it's okay or not, well, that'll let me take a look at what binary was responsible for making this connection. And I have found some real doozies. One of the hunts we did, it turned out to be Notepad was making the connections. Oh, no way, man, Chris. Notepad doesn't talk on the network. No, it doesn't. So the notepad that was making the network connection was clearly not the notepad it should have been. Somebody replaced that binary. But think about that. You're going through your system logs, right? You're using a SIM, centrally logging everything everybody's doing, and you see somebody keeps running notepad. Are you going to pay attention to that? Probably not, right? But in the context of seeing it's connecting to the network, oh yeah, that becomes a real interesting version of notepad at that point there. So this is what I mean when I talk about persistency right down here. So we've got a graph here. My x-axis is time. Each one of these bars represents a 1-hour period of time. My y-axis is quantity. So what this graph is describing is how often did my internal system connect to a specific external target over the course of a 24-hour period of time. Now notice I've got a little red line drawn in here. They're not exactly equal, but it's doing it about the same amount of time every hour, right? This is what I mean when I say connection persistency. There's a constant communication session going on. Now again, checking time, checking patches, whatever, okay, that's fine. But if I can't run down something like that, oh yeah, this is definitely worth going in and paying attention to. This graph here is actually breaking out. My x-axis is what was the amount of time that went by between connection attempts. So it's my dwell time between connections. And y is quantity. How many times did I see that connection time? Now, if it's NTP or checking for patches or something normal, you'll get one line here and one line only because it's going to do it on the exact interval, right? So I'm running a Windows system, running simple network time protocol. Every 30 minutes, it's going to check for time. So I'm going to see 2 connections every hour, all day long. Oh wait, there was only one connection this hour. There's 3 this hour. Okay, and now there's 2 all through the rest of the day. It's going to be an exact time interval. So you'll see one peak only. Well, notice what's going on here. Sometimes it was only 5 seconds, sometimes it was 27 seconds, sometimes I think it's up in like 40-second range. What's going on here? This is what's referred to as jitter. Jitter is just the attacker saying, rather than connecting on a regular interval, I'm going to change that up a little bit. Why would the attacker do this? They do this because most network-based tools that try to find these command and control channels leverage a math algorithm called k-means clustering. So that's K-MEANS space clustering. There's a good wiki on it in case you want to look it up. But basically, all K-means is K-means looks for repetitive patterns. So imagine we had a million connections go out to the internet yesterday. And buried in there is one internal system, once per minute, connecting to the same IP address out on the internet. Well, K-means will look at that and say, oh, every minute, once per minute, that's a repetitive pattern. You should pay attention to that. But as soon as the attacker does this, as soon as they jitter the connection, K-means looks at that and says, well, that's not a repetitive pattern anymore, so I'm going to ignore it. So any tool that's trying to use K-means to find command and control channels, anything that gets jittered, they're going to fall back on being signature-based, which means you can only catch the stuff that you actually know about. That's not really helpful. You know, if something leading edge comes out, we still want to be able to catch those too. So yeah, this becomes a little bit of a signature for us too now, because if you see jitter, that probably means this is something malicious you need to be worried about. The only time I've seen a legitimate connection getting jittered like this was a cloud vendor when they're monitoring your VM instances. They'll actually mix up the time interval a little bit just to make sure they're not trying to connect and check the timing on 1,000 different systems all at the same time. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. But that's the one case I found where it's not consistent and it is actually legitimate. Okay, that's great. How do we catch this stuff? One of my favorite tools in the whole world is Zeek. Zeek is a network recorder. So what Zeek will do is it'll create an entry for every connection it sees. It'll record what's going on at the IP header layer, and for the 55 protocols it understands, it'll record things at the application layer as well. Rena, AC Hunter, there's both a commercial and a community edition of this. Leverage those Zeek logs to find those instances of connection persistency that I was talking about. But you can't go in and build this stuff yourself. And, you know, if you think about what's going on in this bottom graph, how many connections are taking place each time? Okay, for any of you who have any Python experience, you're probably already thinking in your head, oh yeah, Chris, I could do that in one line. Yeah, it's not that hard to go through and do. But how do you collect that data? Zeek's probably your best bet for going in and doing that. So let's kind of walk through a threat hunt. Let's kind of walk through, okay, we go in, we're going to check our network, we're going to see if there's anything here worth worrying about. So one of our tools flags a couple of connection pairs, this being one of them, and says, hey, this might be something worth paying attention to. Well, look at this graph on the bottom. Hey, I could draw a flat line across the top. Hey, that's connection persistency. Hey, that's worth going in and paying attention to. Oh, look, there is a little bit of jitter taking place here. Not a whole lot, but just a little bit. By the way, if you see something like this where it kind of has a bell curve characteristic to it, that's going to be Cobalt Strike. If you're not familiar with Cobalt Strike is used by just about every red team, just about every criminal organization, and just about every nation state. Everybody uses Cobalt Strike. It's commercial software. The bad guys aren't supposed to use it. But, you know, gee, surprise, surprise, they stole the software and they're using it illegally. Hey, the bad guys, that's what happens. But anytime I see something looking like a bell curve over here, that tells me, yeah, I might be looking at Cobalt Strike. So I've got a persistent connection taking place. So the next thing I may want to do, so let's say I run down that target IP and I can't find a business need associated with it. Well, the next thing I may want to go in and do is look at the protocol and see what's going on. So what I see is my internal system is doing a GET request over and over and over again for the file ppptp.jpg in the Metro 91 admin 1 directory. So it's, see if we go back here, I'm sure you can read this back here. So this is about 120 times every hour. So every 30 seconds, my system is trying to get that same image file over and over again. That's a little weird, right? Now, here's where it gets even weirder. Our server is saying that JPEG file is plain text. No, that server should be identifying that JPEG file as image slash JPEG. It's an image file, right? The server should identify it as an image, yet it isn't. Why? Because this way, that whatever tool is actually reading in this data stream knows to process it as a data stream. Don't try and display it as an image. So that's our first clue. Clue number two, if I look at the host parameter, this is the connection going to Mahima Life Science, except that isn't an L, that's the number one. G. So the domain is slightly different with a number instead of a letter. We've seen that in the past and it always turns out bad, right? So we're seeing that, so that's got my attention. Now, I've got a user agent string that says that the software being used to connect to this system is Microsoft Internet Explorer version 7, and the operating system it's running on is Windows XP. Now, maybe I've still got Windows XP in my environment, probably not. One of the things I could do to cross-reference this is I could look at, hey, this internal IP address, what other user agent strings does it use? And what you typically find is, oh, hey, when it talked to these 80 other systems out on the internet, it used one of these four user agent strings that are all tied specifically to like Windows 10. So the only time it's identifying itself as Windows XP is when it's talking to this one host out on the internet. Oh, no, that doesn't happen. There is one really out there edge case. Maybe I'm running a VM that's running Windows XP and I'm connecting to a host on the internet, but there's not a lot of good use cases for that. We do run into situations where we need to run outdated and no longer supported software because there's some application that runs on it that talks to our database and they haven't bothered to get it past Windows XP. But those systems we're talking to are usually going to be on the inside. They're not going to be out on the internet someplace. So this kind of bothers me a lot too. Okay, so looking at the HTTP header, this looks kind of scary. So let's go into the body of the message and see if there's anything there that kind of grabs our attention. The first thing that grabs my attention is it's telling the receiving system, IO.memory string. Don't write this to disk. Write this into memory only. Why might you want to do that? Doesn't leave any forensic trail on the disk, right? Oh, that makes me a little nervous. And then here we see from base 64. In other words, yeah, we could have just sent this in ASCII, but we decided to convert it to base 64 before sending it across the wire. Why? The only legitimate reason I can think of is if you're running a network-based intrusion prevention system that's trying to do signature matching on things like, hey, is it trying to access this DLL or run PowerShell or whatever the case may be, you're not going to see any of that because it's been obfuscated by being converted to base 64. Notice, you don't have to encrypt it. All you're going to do is just not let it be in ASCII anymore, and you're going to defeat all of those tools. Now, this is a huge amount of data, dot, dot, dot. But if I jump down to the end, then I see gzip string. So they compress this data as well. So rather than it being ASCII, it's converted to base 64 and it's been run through gzip to get compressed up. Someone's just obfuscating the data when it's on the wire. This call out here tells me somebody's invoking PowerShell. So they're leveraging PowerShell to go through and run this. Oh, anytime a website is trying to run PowerShell on your desktop, be afraid. It never ends well. Okay, so we've got this stuff here. Right? See where the green arrows are, or the green brackets here? This is all encoded with base 64 and with gzip. Is there any way we can convert that back out? Absolutely. All we need to do is the same thing that PowerShell is going to do, which is to go through and run it through base 64, excuse me, run it through base 64, convert it back, and then run it through gzip. Well, we can use a tool like CyberChef for that. So I can go in with CyberChef and I can pick from base 64 from here and just drag it over here. And then I can pick from gzip, or I can use gunzip over here and just drag it over here. So that's going to tell CyberChef what to do with the data. Then I just say copy paste, and I take that text string, paste it into here, and notice, it might be hard to see from there, but this is ASCII. You can now read it. So we can go through and we can convert what's actually going by on the wire. Now, if we start digging through this is clearly program code. If we start digging through that, if we go down to line 5 and scroll out a little bit, oh, we see this here. What's that doing? That's trying to do a DLL side load on system DLL. In other words, we're injecting code into memory and trying to make it look like it's associated with system DLL, which most endpoint software says, oh, system DLL, yeah, it's safe, don't worry about that. So your endpoint software isn't going to trigger on this. Wow, Chris, that looked interesting. I'd love to dig into that myself. We run off of our off of our blog a series called Malware of the Day. So you can go up to that, download a PCAP that has what we were just talking about in there. And what I recommend is go to the page, skip to the bottom, grab the PCAP, run your hunt through it, see if you can see what you can detect, and then go back and read the blog entry. Did you miss anything? If you missed anything, hey, you may need to tweak your processes a little bit. Tweak your processes, come back in about another week or two, we'll have another malware of the day for you to check out. Okay, here's another one. Remember I talked about using DNS as a command and control channel. One of the side effects of that is you end up with what looks like an excessive number of resource records within your domain. What do I mean by that statement? Okay, how many resource records does it make sense for a domain to expose to the internet for people to do lookups on? For your average domain. You can have web server, mail server, a couple of DNS servers. Look, I'm still counting figures on my hand. In other words, if we say 10 or less, that's going to cover most domains. Now, there's some large service providers like Amazon, Akamai, Apple, that you may resolve a couple hundred in the course of a day. But they're large presences on the internet. You know, Amazon, Akamai, I don't have to tell anybody what any of those do, right? You know. So you recognize those names when you see them. Okay, with that in mind, looking at this data, r-1x.com, we resolved over 62,000 resource records within that domain. Now, here's a domain I've never heard of, and we had to look up 62,000 resource records. That doesn't make any sense. You can also look at this, if you can get the answers to the queries, you can also go in and look at this from a utilization standpoint. In other words, if you just turn on login on your DNS server, you usually see the queries going up, you don't see the answers. But use something like Zeek that's pulling this information off the wire, now you see the answers as well. Which means I can go in and track to say, okay, I did 62,000 queries. How many of my users actually accessed a resource on that domain? Well, the answer is 0. So we did 62,000 lookups and nobody needed to go there. Oh, that should raise lots of red flags. Further, the first, one of the top posts we were resolving was 20202020202020r-1x.com. Oh, who's going to name their system that, right? Wait, was it 202020202020, or was it 202020? Oh, no, that's another. Yeah, no, we never do this. So this is kind of a red flag. Once we flag on that and that pretty easily, we can do that with scripting, do that with tools. When we human look at this, yeah, that tells us something's wrong. And if we look at what characters are being used, it becomes pretty quickly obvious that this is hex. Because everything's a number or a letter A to F, and that's it. Well, can we go through and can we pull that up? Can we run that through CyberChef like we did with the other channel? Unfortunately, no, because we got this here, right? We've got the top level part of the domain. We only want the hex, so we need an easy way to pull that out. Well, one of the easiest ways to pull it out is using T-Sharp. If you're not familiar with T-Sharp, you're definitely familiar with this product suite because this is part of Wireshark. T-Shark just runs on the command line. But I can go through a T-Shark and I can say, read that PCAP file, pull out my DNS queries. So it's going to pull out this portion of the address space, and then I can just go in and use cut to say, only grab the host portion, only grab that hex. And then once I do that, run it through XXD, that'll convert it from hex to ASCII, and I'm going to end up with something that looks like this. Now, we get some special characters in here that are hard to read, but it's probably pretty obvious very quickly without fixing those that our command and control server was told to run the IP config command, and this is data that's being exfiltrated about what the IP setup is to that system. So that's what's actually going out across these DNS queries, is run IP config. Okay, I ran it, here are the results from that. Here's a PCAP link to that. And if this stuff seems fun, I actually run a free 6-hour class on this. We just did one last week, so we probably won't run it again until the end of the summer. But if you go to this link, all the information from that is posted up there, so you can go through this at your own pace. If you have any questions, grab me, say hi, green shirt, I'm easy to spot. Um, that's the Discord, Threat Hunter Discord server is the one I hang out in the most. You can hit me on LinkedIn. That's my email address. You can hit me there. I love talking about this stuff. So always more than happy to chat through. And with that, thank you for turning out. Much appreciated.